Some breaking news in a CBS Sports HQ. The final head coaching vacancy in the NFL has been filled. The Houston Texans have come to terms with former Ravens assistant head coach David Culley. Our Jason Canfora confirms Culley spent the last 17 seasons of his coaching career as an offensive assistant during multiple stops across the NFL. Culley will now be tasked with rerouting a Texas franchise in turmoil. Let's welcome in CBS Sports senior NFL insider Jonathan Jones. Head coaching musical chairs coming to a halt, at least for now, JJ. The music stops and the final seat filled in Houston by David Culley. JJ, plenty to unpack here. First and foremost, how do you like this fit philosophically, what Culley brings to Houston?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a name that not many people outside of Baltimore, Kansas City, or Philadelphia have really known anything about in the last 10 years in terms of the NFL. But the passing game coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens, now that should be a little bit of a concern considering the passing game woes of the Baltimore Ravens, especially this season. Some of that can be chalked up to personnel. Some of it can be chalked up to Lamar Jackson throwing the deep ball, and some of it has to be chalked up to coaching. But David Culley, 65 years old, first-time head coach, and I was asking around the league about him earlier today as things in Houston started to narrow between Culley and Leslie Frazier. Knew plenty about Leslie Frazier, the former head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, of course, one of the best guys in the entire NFL. Coaching, playing, all of that. But Culley was interesting because what he was described to me as was a guy, obviously, who loves football, has all the bona fides there, but a guy who also can bridge the gap, can sort of bridge the aisle, if you will, on race relations, perhaps. And obviously, there's been a lot that has gone on with the Houston Texans, with owner Cal McNair, bringing on Jack Easterby, who's clearly running the show there, bringing on Nick Caserio as the GM, and then Deshaun Watson obviously upset there. There was a report a couple of weeks ago that he was miffed, at least in part, by the team's social justice initiatives, or lack thereof, over the last several months, dating back to 2020. So I bring up David Culley's background because this is a guy who grew up going to segregated schools in Tennessee. He was the first black quarterback on scholarship at Vanderbilt. According to one story, he was the first black quarterback that went to Vanderbilt who was not then switched to, let's say, wide receiver, as so many black quarterbacks from his era were. And so he grew up in Tennessee. He sort of dealt with all of those things. And I know that he was a guy who spoke very sharply to Baltimore Ravens over the summer, dating back to Memorial Day and everything that we all went through as a country back over the summer when all of the coaches and players were gathering, obviously virtually. He was sharing some of his stories from the late 60s and early to mid 70s. And so when you talk about a leader, I think a lot of folks, if you've heard anything about David Culley, people have sort of danced around that idea, but to sort of put a fine point on it, he's a guy who has lived for a very long time. Obviously 65 years old is a long time for a first-year head coach, but has also lived a lot of life and seen a lot of things and can help out an organization that clearly is in a lot of tumult right now. Yeah, brings in experience both on and off the field. But I think if you're a Texans fan right now, the sentiment is, okay, great, but what about my quarterback? Culley does bring in the coaching tree mystique of Andy Reid, but is it enough to keep Deshaun Watson in Houston? Yeah, it's a great question. A couple of weeks ago, I was told the only thing that was going to keep Deshaun Watson in Houston was an Eric Bieniemy hire. But I've been told really for the last month there was no chance that Eric Bieniemy was going to be hired by the Houston Texans, and very clearly he was not. So what's it going to take for Deshaun Watson to stick around in Houston? Obviously, there was a report out a few days ago that said it wouldn't matter who the head coach was. Things in Houston are irreparable, that he is not enjoying the owner, Cal McNair, who, since taking over for his late father, Bob McNair, has shown to be a very weak owner. And I use the word weak in quotations. That's what one leak source had described him as to me about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and everything has sort of just flown from there. Yeah, I don't know exactly what it means from Deshaun, because he has not said outright, hey, I want to trade. That's sort of the last bullet that he has there. And once you say that, that's the point of no return. But he's gotten pretty close to it. You could say he's on the precipice of it. But right now, he is a Houston Texan. And we're going to see what David Culley can perhaps do, what Jack Easterby and Nick Caserio and Cal McNair can do to help bridge this divide between their franchise quarterback and their franchise. So is it a fait accompli that Deshaun Watson is not going to be a Houston Texan in 2021? I would not say that it is a guarantee that he will not be a Houston Texan, but if I were a betting man, I would say that the odds are that he would not be a Houston Texan in 2021.
And with that said, a quarter of the NFL will pencil him in, fans that is, to their Week 1 lineups next season. It can't go without mentioning, JJ, that Culley is now the 7th first-time NFL head coach hired during this cycle. It's a great thing that these guys are getting opportunities. Furthermore, as you said, Culley, as a minority head coach here. What do you make of all of these franchises electing to go with fresh faces instead of experience and maybe names that are more known in these hirings?
Yeah, the coaching cycle is a cycle. It's cyclical a lot of times. And sometimes I think that we saw back after 2016 and the success that Sean McVay and the Rams had, 2017 rather, that we saw all the offensive coordinators and all the young gurus, right? And we still saw some of that this year. But we also have seen CEO types. That was the buzzword this past year. We saw guys who call plays. We saw guys who don't call plays, like a Nick Sirianni, like a Dan Campbell in Detroit now. It all sort of ran across the board. But the one constant, Joe, and I think you're right to point this out, we're first-time head coaches, and so that is interesting. And retread is a word that I can tell you what, a lot of retread coaches and GMs do not like that word. But also, it doesn't play well to fans, and team owners understand that. Folks making decisions also understand that. They're coming off a year where revenues were down across the board. The league and its teams are going to lose somewhere between $3 and $4 billion this year compared to what the year would have been like with fans in the stands. And so it's not really a surprise in that context that they want to do something that will have fans say, all right, you know what, here's some money. Here's some PSL season ticket money. Let's buy some jerseys. Let's feel invigorated or reinvigorated about our team. And a lot of times the best way, or at least the fastest way to do that, would be hiring a fresh face rather than a guy who has that record that you can point to and say, well, they only won 5 games in that one year, and he was a terrible play caller that one time. And that's not necessarily the case with all these first-time head coaches. There's going to be plenty of optimism, plenty of uncertainty as we enter into a draft season, unlike any other, because you remember last year, of course, we still at least had the Combine and a Senior Bowl and some pro days. We're only going to get a very abridged version of all of those things coming up. So plenty of optimism for all of those fan bases with their head coaches. But if anyone like me or someone else were to sit here and tell you, hey, here's how each one of these guys is going to do in the first 3 years of their job, they'd all be lying to you.
If nothing else, we have the unknown. Jonathan Jones, thank you for the insights. For more on this and the continued coaching carousel, be sure to download and subscribe to the Pick 6 podcast. Our guys break down all the latest news across the NFL, bringing their unique response to all of these hirings and all things across the league. Download and subscribe to the Pick 6 podcast today. Don't move a muscle. Straight ahead on CBS Sports HQ, our Jason La Canfora joins us with his reaction to the David Culley hiring in Houston.
Want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis. No yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.